Hi there, Robert John Hadfield from Audiomover here again. Going to do another video about some classic vinyl, and this was one of my favorite albums back in the 80s, or at least one of my favorite bands. The album that came out before this one was my favorite one by this band, and I think for a lot of people that was the touchstone of Iron Maiden. This particular album, Iron Maiden's Peace of Mind, which features Eddie on the front cover like all of their albums do. This was the second album with Bruce Dickinson as the lead singer. The first couple of albums, Iron Maiden and Killers, the lead singer had been a guy named Paul Di'Anno. And I've heard a few different stories about what happened and why he ended up leaving the group. You know, Steve Harris has talked about it a little bit, about he had substance abuse problems. And I also heard that Steve Harris just didn't feel like Paul Di'Anno could really take them where they needed to go. And so they got the guy that was the singer for a band called Samson. This was Bruce Dickinson. And he came in as the lead singer on the album right before this one, which was called The Number of the Beast. And which was an enormous, like a huge album. And they're an incredible band, partly because they became so popular and are still to this day so popular, getting almost no airplay from radio stations. MTV back in the day was a little bit, but no radio support, nothing like that. These guys were just Iron Maiden. And the imagery, the music, something about it just captured people. And they became this enormous band, and they continue to be one of the biggest heavy metal bands in the world, still to this day. You go anywhere in the world today, if Iron Maiden could go almost anywhere in the world today and fill up an arena. They're that big. And so, or at least they have been that big in the past, and they're just kind of legend status now. So anyway, this album was a follow-up to, once again, Number of the Beast, which was just it was a great album. And so they of course have this character on the front. His name is Eddie. Now, a lot of people don't know the story behind how he got this name. Eddie, when Iron Maiden was first playing, they would have this, what looked like a head that would sit on the wall in the back of the stage somehow, and then at certain points in the show, like smoke would come out of its mouth or something. And so they referred to it as the head. Iron Maiden's the head that Iron Maiden would take around, and then over time, you take the British accent, you put it in there, and it's Ed instead. You lose the H, and then it just kind of became Eddie. So Eddie is short for head, or long for head, or something like that. But that's how this character, which is just a corpse, got its name Eddie. And you see this character on all of their stuff. It became an incredible marketing tool. This character Eddie. So let's flip this over. This album's been torn up a little bit over time too. And they continued something. When you go back to Number of the Beast, one of the things that was interesting about that album, of course, Number of the Beast, that idea or that phrase is taken from the Bible in the book of Revelation. And I could probably quote you what it says on the Number of the Beast, the actual album. Woe to you, O earth and sea, for the devil sends the beast with wrath because he knows the time is short. Anyway, so they put that verse, or from the book of Revelation, they wrote it on the back of the album Number of the Beast. Well, then they did the same thing down here on this next album, continuing that idea, and they put some other thing from the book of Revelation, another verse down here. So then, here's the lineup of the album and from the band, and this is also where they made another change. So Bruce Dickinson, of course, is the vocalist that I just mentioned. Dave Murray, Adrian Smith, the guitars. Steve Harris, he's the brains behind the band. He's the bass player. He's the guy that writes all the music, and he's the one that's really the head, the leader of this group. But then they have somebody named Nicko McBrain. Nicko McBrain, this is his first album as the drummer. There was a lot of turnover in this band in the early days. Nicko McBrain is the drummer, and he replaced a guy named Clive Burr. Clive Burr had performed on the previous album, and I don't really remember. I think there was some sort of health issue or something. I can get somebody will correct me if that's not true. But Clive Burr was a great drummer. But then he got replaced by Nicko McBrain on this album. Now Nicko McBrain he'd been around a little bit prior to this. I think he'd played with Pat Travers, but the band that he was in at the time when Iron Maiden picked him up was a band called, I think it was called Trust. And so then they picked Nicko McBrain up, and then he became the drummer. And to this day, Nicko is still the drummer. And so then one other name that you might notice down here is this was produced by Martin Black Knight Birch. Now, Martin Birch, this guy has been like everywhere. I mean, he worked with everybody from Deep Purple to Whitesnake to Black Sabbath. As a matter of fact, two of my favorite Black Sabbath albums, which were the Dio albums, which were Heaven and Hell and Mob Rules, he produced both of those albums. And so, or at least he worked on them. I'm not sure if he was I'm pretty sure he was the producer. Anyway, he was one of the greats as far as hard rock goes, great producers. I mean, just he'd worked with so many people over the years. He was just a fantastic producer. And so he, put his signature on this thing, this amazing sound that he's able to produce as a producer. So this ended up being another one of their classic albums. Now, for me, Where Eagles Dare, great song. Revelations is a really, really I love everything on here. Flight of Icarus, though, was the one that they attempted, I think, to make the hit. And I don't know if it was ever on the charts or not. I should look that up. That song was the closest thing that I think they may have ever had to having a hit song, because that one actually did get a little bit of airplay. Die With Your Boots On. If you're going to die with your boots on. Excellent song. The Trooper. If you're an Iron Maiden fan, you know the song The Trooper. That was just an incredible song. Still Life. I remember I loved these songs, but unlike some of the others, I couldn't sing them right now. This was a great album. I thought this was not as great as Number of the Beast, but it still had, once again, The Trooper is such a classic Iron Maiden song that anyway, that was on this album. So let's go ahead and take a look on the inside, see what we have in here. This was kind of cool what they did, and part of the fun of Iron Maiden albums, back then when you're a kid, and it was part of the fun of having records, was that you'd bring these things home and you would then start to explore. You'd put the record on the turntable, and then you'd start reading and looking, and things like Martin Birch. You'd see that name, you go, wait a minute, where have I seen that name before? And you're flipping through your records, and you pull it out. Oh my gosh, he's on my Black Sabbath album, and you'd start making these connections, and it was fun. Records were, you had this totally different connection with music back then because you would do this. And so I remember bringing this one home, and it's this album called Peace of Mind, and then I just start studying this picture, looking for any little messages, and I noticed how Bruce Dickinson had this apple on the end of this this knife, and he was probably doing it just to be silly, but I'm looking at that as a kid going, whoa, what does that mean? Of course, didn't mean anything, but it was, this is what happens from an adolescent boy's mind, being so fascinated by this. And then here's the brain on the platter, and then you look in the background, there's death. There's death in the window, or what does all this mean here? And you see these knights in the background. And anyway, here's the band. There's Bruce Dickinson. There's Nicko McBrain. He was the new one in the band right here. So anyway, let's flip this back over. And then once again, you have all the lyrics for all the different tunes here. And you'll notice here in a lot of cases. So here, Steve Harris wrote the song "Where Eagles Dare." Bruce Dickinson wrote "Revelations." Adrian Smith and Bruce Dickinson wrote "Flight of Icarus," which once again, that was the one that really, I think really took off or had a chance at taking off. Steve Harris helped write that one. Smith, Dickinson, Harris. Steve Harris wrote The Trooper, and if you know anything about Steve Harris's music, it's very technical, and you can just tell by the bass line, that's his song. Murray Harris on Still Life. Anyway, Quest for Fire Harris. I don't need to go through all these, but anyway, this is, once again, this is back in, you know, when Iron Maiden, in my opinion, was really at their peak. This was the greatest stuff. Now, there are a lot of people that would argue with me, and, you know, I've heard many people say that Seventh Son is maybe their best album that they ever put out. And then, you know, others albums, there's, you know, people go back and forth. There's a lot of really hardcore Iron Maiden fans out there. But for me personally, this was when they were at their pinnacle. Number of the Beast was the in my opinion, just the best thing that they ever did. And then this, for me, was probably close runner-up to that album. You'll see that it's kind of torn here, but it's just hard to beat. These guys had a sound, they had a persona. They were just one of the great heavy metal bands, and they just influenced everybody. All the heavy metal musicians that came after them, just about everybody somehow was impacted by what these guys did. So anyway, thought you'd find that interesting. Iron Maiden, Peace of Mind. And once again, if you like these videos, please like and subscribe and leave your comments. Let us know what other records you'd like us to talk about. And of course, if you have old audio and video tapes and you need to convert them to digital, go to audiomover.com and they'll take care of you there. Anyway, have a fantastic day.